How does a program make a decision? Well, that's the exact question that we're going to answer right now. In today's video, we're going to take a look at JavaScript conditionals and how JavaScript can make decisions using these conditionals. But what in the world is a conditional? A conditional is a statement to check to see if something is true or if something is false. And therefore, before we dive into conditionals and how they work, we need to understand Truthey and Falsey statements. So Truthey and Falsey values are values that are either true or false when encountered in a Boolean context. And the majority of things are actually true, so let's take a look at what's actually false, and then just about everything else is going to be true. So Falsey values include the keyword false, null, undefined, not a number, 0, -0, and empty strings. And these are all considered false when encountered in a Boolean context. But just about everything else is of Truthey value, and some of these include the keyword true, empty objects and arrays, any number excluding 0, any string that contains one or more characters, and many other things. Just about everything else is considered Truthey. So now that we know the difference between Truthey and Falsey values, let's dive into conditionals starting with the if statement. So to write this if statement, we're going to go ahead and head over to the JavaScript, and inside of this JavaScript file, we're just going to say if, and after the if statement, we're going to put open and closing parentheses, and this is where our conditional is going to go, and inside of here, it's going to evaluate whether the condition is true or if the condition is false. And then after the parentheses, we are going to put double curly braces. And if the condition inside of the parentheses evaluates to true, everything inside of the double curly braces is going to run. And if whatever's inside of the double parentheses evaluates to false, nothing inside of the double curly braces is going to run. So for our first if check, we're going to check to see if the keyword true is true. And if it does evaluate to true inside of those double parentheses, everything inside of these double curly braces is going to run. So let's just go ahead and console.log it evaluated to true. And whenever we save that, you can see over in the console that it evaluated to true is logged out to the console. And that's just simply because this true here, this keyword true, is always going to evaluate to true. So this right here is always going to run. But if we try to put a falsy value in here, maybe something like null, this is actually never going to run because null is a falsy value and it's always going to evaluate to false. So this is never going to be true and it's never going to run. But we could always put something else in here that is true. Maybe the string false. What do you think? Is that going to evaluate to true or is that going to evaluate to false? Well, if we save it, it's actually going to evaluate to true. And that's simply because it's a string and not the keyword. So if we were to put the false keyword in there without the double quotation marks around it, it's going to evaluate to false. But since it is a string and it has characters inside of it, it's going to evaluate to true. And we can even test this with other things as well. So 0 is always going to evaluate to false, but any other number is always going to evaluate to true. Even negative numbers is always going to evaluate to true. 0 is just the only value that is going to be false. So what do we do if we have some code that we want to run in the instance that this evaluates to false? Well, we can use the else statement. And this else statement, it has to come after an if statement. It cannot be on its own. It has to come after an if statement. And the else statement is kind of like a catch-all. If the if statement above evaluates to false, then the else statement is going to run. So let's just say console.log the if statement is false. All right, and this is only going to run if this is not true. So we can see if we save right now, this is evaluating to true. And the only thing that we're getting in the console is the evaluation or the log inside of the if statement. But what if we change this to, let's say, false? If we change this to false, then the else statement is going to run, and we're going to see the if statement is false. And that is true, because the if statement is false, nothing inside of here ever ran, so it eventually got down to the else statement, and the else statement ran. So what do we do in the case where we have multiple conditions that we want to check in the instance that one of them returns false? Well, we have a third part to the if statement called the else if statement. And this else if statement is going to come after the if statement, but it's going to come before the else statement. This is going to check another condition if the first one returns false. So we can check else if 5 is greater than 4. And then if this returns true, we're going to log out this statement right here. This is going to run inside of the else if statement. And if that returns false, we can also put our else clause at the end, and we can just say console.log nothing is true. And if we save that, we are going to actually get this else if statement that's going to run. And because we have 5 that is greater than 4, this returns true, so this is going to run, but this is not going to run because this one came back true. But now that we know how the if, else if, and else clauses work, let's take a look at logical operators. These allow us to combine multiple conditions together to make one Boolean value. So something is true or something is false, depending on whether multiple conditions are true and false. So let's take a look at the first logical operator, the AND operator. And what this does is it combines multiple conditions together, and all of these conditions must be true before the whole condition evaluates to true. So let's take a look at that. So we can say 5 is greater than 4, and we already know that this is true because we've already seen it. But we can add the AND logical operator just by using these double ampersand signs here, and we can add a second condition here. And this condition has to be true as well for this whole thing to evaluate to true. So if we say 15 is greater than 14, and we save that, we can actually see that it evaluates to true because both of these conditions are true, so the whole thing is true. But if we say 15 is less than 14, now we're not going to get anything output, because while 5 is greater than 4, that evaluates to true, the AND operator says that both of them have to be true for the whole thing to be true. So this evaluates to false, so the whole thing is going to evaluate to false. Now we can also use the logical OR operator, and this is essentially the opposite of the logical AND operator. And what this does is it only requires one condition to evaluate to true for the whole thing to be true. If every condition is false, that's the only condition where it can return false. But if a single condition is true, then the whole thing evaluates to true. So if we use the logical OR operator here, which is this double pipe symbol, we can save this and we can see that it now evaluates to true, even though this one here is still evaluating to false. It sees this and realizes this is true, so it has to return true. Now the last operator that we're going to take a look at today is the NOT operator, and essentially what this does is this is just going to flip the end result. So if it evaluates to true, it's going to flip it, and it's going to now be false. So let's take a look at that. So if we are evaluating false here, this is going to be false. It's going to evaluate to false. But if we use the NOT operator in the front, it's essentially going to just flip that false statement and make it now true. So it's going to read not false. So whenever we flip that false, it's going to be true, and then inside of here is going to now run because that is true. And this, out of all of the 3 different operators, is my most used operator, the one that I use the most whenever I'm programming. And that is it for JavaScript conditionals. Now, this is a foundational concept for just about every programming language. So if you didn't understand anything, I encourage you to go back and re-watch the video a couple of times, maybe practice it some, and if you have any questions, leave them down in the comments down below. I'll answer as many questions as you have. Otherwise, if you did like the video, make sure you slap a like on it. Check out the full playlist, link is right next to me. Make sure you subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.